That's why I wanted to talk to you about this subject of an Orthodox Magisterium.
What is orthodoxy? Um, Good grief, it's union with God, it's prayer, it's pure, prayer. I think that. Do you see my problem with like the
So I
question?
don't know if you call it an ecumenical council. Would you be willing to call it an ecumenical council?
Well, no, I don't think anyone can.
Only the Roman Church talked about itself as having a magisterium, and that definition, having the Pope in it, would therefore not be something that the Orthodox Church would typically affirm.
So this is going to sound dismissive. Um, I'm going to sound, yeah, maybe pastorally
Go for it.
insensitive or something,
What do you
but
got? This is the Searchers of the Lost podcast. I'm Father Nathan Simeon, an Italo-Greek Byzantine Catholic priest in Las Vegas. And this is my good friend, Father Christopher, Ukrainian Orthodox priest in Madison.
good to be here, brother.
It is good to be with you. So a brief introduction. So Father Christopher and we actually went to seminary at an Anglican seminary together. It was called Nashotah House. I think we both had a good time there.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the interesting things was like early on in our conversion process, Father Christopher kind of started off more focusing on the Latin end of things, and I started focusing on the more Orthodox ends of things. I think he and I have kind of gone back and forth, I'd say, yeah,
Yeah.
and working through the various realities of both the Latin and Orthodox tradition.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think I met you not long after you got back from Athos. So as an Anglican, right, was that with a group or you went solo?
Yeah, that was when I went by myself. I was at the Apostoliki Diakonia, which was it's like this mission agency in Athens
Okay. Yeah.
that basically hosts students to learn modern Greek. And they allow one Protestant there a year.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So I was the Protestant who went at that time. And then I came back. And I think I discovered from you at that point, maybe earlier, that you had gone to St. Anthony's Monastery, which is where I got my connection to go
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we had talked about that. I'd heard. And, at the Anglican seminary, you have those who lean more Eastern, in their thinking more, well, in particular in the Shoda House, those who are more steeped in the Latin tradition and trying to find, a way to honor tradition while being in the Anglican communion. And then, a number of alumni have went one way or another. But yeah, I've always appreciated our relationship because you, like me, enjoy debate, but not to the point of like taking it personally. It's all about the search for truth. And so I think we hit it off right away just in sharing that similar disposition or something like that. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. It's
Yes.
been a kind of a journey together,
Mhm.
in many ways for me. You and I kind of have seen each other go through lots of different kind of theological paths, emotional paths, etc.,
Yeah.
and working our way here. And so I think I always enjoy conversating with you. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about this subject of an Orthodox Magisterium, because I thought,
Right.
well, Father Christopher would be fun for me to talk to about
Yeah.
this. And the conversation started because you took me out. That was Madison University, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were sitting down. You bought me a beer, and we sat down at the university. Very cool place to kind of relax. And I had said to you, if I remember correctly, I said to you, isn't it hard to not have a magisterium, right? And you reacted, we do have a magisterium, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, talk to me about that. Tell me a little bit about what you mean by that. Because typically, when we hear the term magisterium, we're thinking of Latin, right? We're thinking of the Latin because it comes from the Latin,
It's
and
a
we're
Latin
thinking
word,
of the
right?
kind of right,
Yeah.
we're thinking about the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
So we kind of have to finesse that today, just for fun, man. I was Googling Orthodox Magisterium, and just to kind of see what would pop up. And
Mhm.
this kid created a site on what he thought kind of an Orthodox Magisterium would be. And what I thought was really fascinating about it is he basically was using Vatican II categories,
Huh.
okay, of extraordinary magisterium and ordinary magisterium, and he put together all of the Orthodox councils up to the recent Great and Holy Synod, and all the councils of Constantinople, kind of in the later
Yeah.
councils in the Orthodox Church, and he was including those as ordinary magisterium, and he was kind of cataloging everything, but he was doing it from the Latin grid, the Vatican II grid, which I
Yeah.
thought was kind of fascinating. I'd love to hear though from your perspective how you experience the magisterium. But maybe just for our listeners, I'll
Mhm.
start off by just kind of covering what the Latin Church means by magisterium
Sure.
and the primary documents that it uses these days, at least to speak about what the magisterium is going to be Vatican II, of course, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church, right? Um, so here's a basic rundown of what the magisterium is in the Latin Church, okay, in the Roman Catholic Church. What it's speaking of is it's the authority or office of teaching, in particular about the Word of God. And now, speaking of the Word of God, not just as the Bible, right? Because in the Catholic tradition, it's broader than that. It also includes the oral tradition as well. And in the Catholic Church, according to the Catechism, it assigns this task of interpreting the Word of God, which is the written and oral tradition, to the magisterium of the Church. And in particular, it points out that this is the magisterium of the Pope and the College of Bishops in communion with him. Okay, so the teaching office of the magisterium in the Latin tradition is then broken into two basic categories. Ex cathedra, which is kind of what you think about when you hear about papal infallibility, this kind of a thing, which is called extraordinary magisterium. And then it also talks about ordinary magisterium, okay, where you get letters written by either individual letters by bishops or popes.
Right.
You can speak of the Catechism of the Catholic Church as an example of ordinary magisterium. And so you can have homilies of the Pope; those would be ordinary magisterium. But the essential idea is that you have a magisterium, and that includes the Pope and all the bishops in communion with him. And so I wasn't trying to denigrate the Orthodox Church at all when I was asking Father Christopher this question, because I had in my mind that only the Roman Church talked about itself as having a magisterium, and that definition, having the Pope in it, would therefore not be something that the Orthodox Church would typically affirm, right? So it wasn't a denigration; it was just my understanding of the definition magisterium.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, by that definition, of course, it's not consistent. And of course, it's not an Eastern term that we readily take on, ourselves. I mean, I'm interested, like when you saw that site, was that like a well-known like podcast or blog or something? Or was that something random when you were doing the Google search and you saw an Orthodox person who had
It was it
categorized
was
things that way?
pretty random. I mean, if you want, I can pull it up and let you know what it
No,
was I
it's
was
okay. I
looking
was
at.
just well, I was just curious. I know there's been maybe a few podcasters and YouTubers that have tried to tackle the subject matter, and I think I would largely agree with a lot of those few what they've said and done. And in those cases, and of course, we have fun, and sometimes we try to be provocative, because that's part of the fun of it. But I was sincere in the sense, like I said, and I would echo some others, here, that there's a magisterium in the sense that there's a definitive binding teaching authority. And I think that's one of the main places in ecumenical dialogue between Orthodox and Roman Catholic that kind of gets lost. Sometimes Orthodox don't realize that, hey, no, we do have a definitive, kind of a conception of this definitive teaching of the church, and not simply just the seven ecumenical councils. That's often what is kind of reduced to. But I think it's clear evidence that we can discuss today, that extends beyond that. But this idea of that there is a teaching authority, and that teaching authority resides, within the bishops. That's in the patriarch. It's like, I think that's something that's unquestioned, even if we don't call it magisterium. I think we can speak about it that way for the sake of the conversation. It was interesting. I was kind of Googling it too, and there was Father Peter Hare's had one of his videos at Orthodox Ethos on the Orthodox Magisterium, and it was a short video, and this is one of his frequent things that he refers to, almost like in this self-evident way. He's like, well, the Orthodox Magisterium is the teaching of the saints, and it's what the saints say, and he refers to that like, follow the saints, and I appreciate how the authority that he reminds us, that the holy ones have, the charismatic authority, but to say that they're like the magisterium, and in a way that we think about that category, I think he says too much. It's kind of off base. You have such a diversity, right? I think about Saint Alexander Nevsky, and this isn't just a part of his like biography. This is one of the reasons he's heralded as a saint, is because he defended Russia. He killed men, and he showed heroic bravery, but certainly he took the lives of the attackers, in defense, and so he's honored, and that's part of his sainthood. Then you have, Saint Paisios, who wept at a pilgrim, miles away, killing a snake, on the way to visit him, and he's like, "Why did you do that to my friend?" Or, I'm sure I'm butchering it, but something to that effect. And it just goes to show there's like this diversity in the charismatic experiences of the saints, and so I think that we do better to define magisterium, if there is such a way we can think about it, like that, very strictly along the lines of the teaching authority of the bishops. When the patriarchs are in union and that something is defined, it becomes binding for the whole church. And I think that's a case that we can point to and see how that's played out, time and time again. And so in that sense, we can call that our magisterium. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the important point that you just brought up is that, yeah, the difficulty with just saying that the fathers are the magisterium is that you need the living voice, right? There's always been, I think, more so in the Eastern Orthodox churches. There's always been a kind of polarizing of between the kind of ascetical or the charismatic elders, typically monastic of sorts, right? And the hierarchy. And those two have had to, also true in the West, but I mean, I think more true in the East, especially because of iconoclasm and that whole experience, right?
Right.
Where there's kind of a battle that oftentimes is going on between the two, which is not a necessary battle. And by just picking the charismatic elders or the fathers of the church, and not the living tradition of the episcopacy, you end up, I think, actually dividing the church, the apostolic authority of the bishops, and I think that would be a very dangerous practice to go too far with that.
Yeah, and I mean, he spoke saints broadly, not just the fathers. I mean, if you say the fathers or patristic, that's more discreet, but that's still, I'm no patristic scholar myself. I've heard patristic scholars say that there is still yet to be translated, so, in English, so many writings of the fathers, and so, to just sort of have this reductionistic, well, the fathers say. I mean, we've talked about this a lot, and
Yeah.
The consensus patrum is even more discreet, and we could certainly speak to the authority of that, but
Yeah.
it's not so easy to find it, especially in light of, in all these many cases. There's some things we look to the incarnate, Trinity, Christological definitions, look at certain things that, yes, we could speak to, consensus patrum on, but some of these other debates, again, unless you have the linguistics, or there's so much of it that those writings. So I think there's still sort of the need for clarity, the need for definitive teaching is there, and we think about it differently, certainly than the Roman Catholic Church does in many ways, but also people go too far, Orthodox or Catholic, when they say, well, there's no sort of comparison to the teaching
Well,
of the
what would you say? Like, so obviously the Pope, right, would be the issue where the Orthodox would say, okay, yeah, we're not gonna quite go there. But what would be the defining distinctions, would you say, between what we might call an Orthodox magisterium and a Roman Catholic magisterium?
Yeah, quite simply, all the patriarchal synods coming into agreement, and
So
so
you'd have to
one.
have. So okay, that brings up, of course, a sticky question, right? The recent Great and Holy Ecumenical Synod, right? Because
Yeah.
Russia wasn't there, the biggest church in the Orthodox Communion. So how does that affect that synod?
Yep, I think that's a great question, and it's something that's really like that council gets so much hate because people are like, see, look, the Orthodox couldn't do it; they had their chance, and there was 100 years in planning, and people just really on both sides, Orthodox and Catholic, just point to it as sort of this pointless, sort of like veneer of a council, um, but it's not the case, so what is the facts of the matter? um, the Bulgarians, they kind of mistakenly thought the preparatory documents were not up for discussion or amendment. So there's that. Antioch was still in its schism with Jerusalem, and they were like, we're not in a place to come together when our local situation hasn't been solved. Georgia said they had insufficient time to review the documents. And then Russia's like, look, it's not going to be pan-Orthodox with all this other stuff going on. So why should we, invest the resources? And so there's political speculation. And I would speculate, of course, there always is that political side of it. But what I just mentioned is the facts of what these patriarchs release publicly. So we have to take for what's a fact is what they said. And so that was unfortunate. However, some things were accomplished, in that. So, there was discussion around the Council of Jerusalem, the Council of Moldova, Jassy, um, and this idea of defining what tradition is. And this was, accepted and reaffirmed, in the Great and Holy Council. And the patriarchs that had not previously officially accepted those councils happened to be the ones that were present at Crete, and they officially signed and accepted those councils in that great council, Great and Holy Council. And so it accomplished something. The ones that didn't come had already accepted it. The ones that were there had not, and through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, through God's providence, they came to accept officially. And so now these councils, Moldovan Council, Jerusalem Council, they're accepted, they're definitive, and insofar as what they've been, their definitions were accepted by the signing of these documents. They go into effect of being binding, for the Orthodox Church. So that's an example. There's
So
another.
what
Oh,
if
go
you're
ahead.
like if you're Russian Orthodox because your patriarch wasn't there? Is this council binding for you? How do you think about this as a Russian
Well, the
Orthodox?
Russians had already accepted that. They had already accepted those. So there was, so I mean, I
So okay,
think,
so there was actually no need for them to
well,
test now. They already
I
agree with you.
not in that case, there wasn't a need. They could have signed, as the other bishops did, in reaffirming. And if they would have been there, they most likely that would have been the appropriate course. So that's what they would have done. But no, I mean, there's certainly other things that need to be discussed and defined. And there were certainly limitations on the council. It's not without critique. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that a lot of people point to it as being completely useless in this demonstration of like a lack of orthodox teaching authority. And I just find it ironic because there was, in fact, things that were taught and progress that was made, uh, as I just mentioned. So I
Well,
think
let me
that
ask you
it's
this.
sad that
This
didn't come, but
this
yeah,
will be a fun follow-up question, I think.
yeah,
So, okay, so when we're when we're talking about Vatican II, right? And there's so much question about Vatican II, especially among traditionalists, right? Many Roman, in other words, Latin traditionalists,
yeah.
they have their qualms with Vatican II. And
Mhm.
they have particular qualms, right? Unitatis redintegratio, basically the questions on ecumenism, the questions on the church and state. These are big questions in traddy circles, right? Especially the liturgy.
Mhm.
Where would be the major theological conundrums of this of this council? I don't know if you call it an ecumenical council. Would you be willing to call it an ecumenical council?
Well, no, I don't think anyone can because it wasn't called by the emperor. I
Okay,
think
okay,
ecumenical. Well, I mean that's a
fair
bigger
enough.
thing, but that's. I mean, I think that is something probably that's important in this discussion to distinguish too. Is like there's just two ways that we talk about ecumenical. One way is etymological; it's linked to the household and the emperor being that political, you know, uh, force, to a force of personality to bring and to resource, the church to be able to do that. But then by extension, just like we do the term diocese or other, these other Roman terms, we appropriate them, and now ecumenical, means universal. But I think that, we if we don't understand the distinction and we start to look at church history and we start to have these debates without understanding the distinctions, we get in hot water because people are talking past one another, so I'd say on both counts it's not ecumenical because obviously there's no emperor, but then secondly, the church has not received it. uh, the things that it has received as universally binding were what I described. The other things that it touched on, other patriarchs have not accepted yet, and maybe there was even some opposition. Certainly in the preparatory documents, there were some things that got cut out that never even made it to the discussion. And then some of the documents, I think there was some problems that are well documented as well. So
I
um,
want to go down this ecumenical rabbit hole really bad with you, but I don't want to
I
because
know.
we'll get way off topic.
We will. We
Here's
will.
the topic that I'm trying to get to.
Yep.
So the question I was trying to get to here is, so are there theological issues that that maybe you could say traditional Orthodox or even liberal Orthodox? We have this also that's out there. They probably wouldn't criticize Vatican II because they'll just do whatever they want with those documents anyway. But are there theological topics there that are hot topics like you find in Vatican II
No,
among
I mean that you
traditionalists?
can't. The Council of Crete in no way even comes close to approaching the enormity of Vatican II and the influence and the continual need for interpretation. I mean, it just doesn't. It's just like nowhere near that scope. Are there certain things that we could point to? Maybe being controversial, like perhaps, but a lot of them were kind of, fixed, so to speak, in terms of how to address, other Christians, talking about like there was a very strong reaffirmation of our practice of fasting, and some were fearful, and some advocated for like, oh, finally, Council of Crete is going to just put an end to that silly fasting. I mean, like we're the only ones, yada 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 or whatever, like why can't we just go get a fish sandwich on Friday and call it a day like others, kind of thing. It's like, nope, that's not what happened. They very articulately, the council reaffirm that need and the beauty, and
So it's
obviously
it's
with it.
probably,
So
yeah, the comparison probably doesn't work, as you just noted, because Vatican II is very intentionally unlike all previous councils in the Latin Church. It's
yeah,
intentionally a pastoral council. It's intentionally trying to avoid scholastic language in order to communicate to the mass populace.
hmm,
This is probably more similar to the other councils in the sense that uh, it's reaffirming the tradition that's already there. Is that about
yeah,
right?
and I would argue Vatican II, the biggest impact is the liturgical reform that resulted from it. So
Sure.
I mean, there we can speak about a lot of things, but there, to me, that's the most sweeping, the most like, and
Let's
again,
not go there. Let's stick.
yeah, yeah,
Let's stick to orthodoxy.
no, for sure. But you see what I'm saying? Like there was,
Yeah,
I'm not saying that pejoratively. Like I mean, just like you felt it, regardless of how you thought about it, you felt it. Crete isn't something that you feel. Maybe
you
there's
feel.
the
Yeah.
maybe
No, no,
I
I hear you. I just know if we
yeah,
go there, then we'll move way away from the topic of Orthodox Magisterium.
for sure. Keep
But it
us
would
on
be a
track,
fun
my
topic
friend.
to talk about later on.
Yeah.
But for whatever, everyone tries to get me to go there. It's everyone wants to pull me into that conversation. I don't know
There
what
was
it.
nothing insidious about it. I promise you.
Oh man,
I mean, I
yeah.
can be that way,
I'm afraid
but
of the
that's
conversation.
not,
I just don't know enough about the conversation because it's not my world, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
fair.
I'm trying to like enter into it a little bit, but I'm also like careful. I'm very careful with that
Yep.
particular.
But yeah, like I said, it really wasn't to go down. My only point of bringing it up is just to demonstrate like there isn't anything that Crete really makes people feel in that sense because it affects you at the parochial level,
Yeah.
except for maybe just the embarrassment that, yeah, I mean, I'll be humble about that. Like, yeah, I was disappointed and to see that, those patriarchs couldn't, agree to come and they couldn't figure it out. And so that's humbling for sure. But nothing quite, like I said, you go to liturgy on Sunday and there's no noticeable difference.
Sure.
So that's what I
Sure.
meant. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably a step forward, isn't it? A step forward in saying, okay, we're going to stick with these traditions. These are not things that are going to be questioned. It just kind of functions as a talking point, maybe bringing the Orthodox churches back together and saying, hey, listen, we're not budging on these particular issues that we've long held to. Probably something more
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And again, full disclosure, like I'm no expert on that council either. These are just my opinions, but yeah, that would be. I think that's how
Okay.
I describe it.
So I remember back in my seminary, I noticed something interesting. And let me before you jump on me after I say this, I'm gonna smack you a little bit, but I'm gonna smack us back. Okay. So just like let me say the whole thing. So back when I was in seminary, I noticed something really interesting. I would read Orthodox authors and they would say, this is Orthodox. Like, this is Orthodox. And after a while, something I realized was when someone says, for whatever reason, in so many Orthodox authors, when they say this is Orthodox, they're not referring like most of the time when Catholics say this is Catholic, like they're talking about, some ecumenical council. They're talking about like some pretty well held to belief within the magisterium. But oftentimes when Orthodox people say this is Orthodox, what they're referring to is their own perspective. So like something like what you brought up before, it's like, well, this is the teaching of the fathers. And it's like, well, it's more like this is the fathers that I read that I agree with that I'm going to call the Orthodox fathers. Okay.
Yeah. Or even
Now,
worse that
now
I've
I'll,
heard, I've never read, but heard it said, that's even worse. But yeah.
so okay, so now I'll slap us in the face too. Whenever I talk to my traditionalist brethren and they bring up Denzinger, I remember this reading Denzinger back in seminary because we were trained to read Denzinger. Pretty much whenever Denzinger says the ecumenical councils, it's talking about Vatican I and Trent. That's it. Like it's so consistent. And when it says the fathers, it's talking about Augustine. So there's we both I see this happening in both churches, right? Like where
Yeah.
it's like this is the tradition, or you could read ought as well, right? And it's a kind of very limited scope of the patristic tradition being proclaimed as the Catholic tradition. But at the same time, I find oh, there was this one anecdotal story which is pretty funny. There was this monk arguing with some other monks, and they were arguing about what orthodoxy is. And he takes out a stick. Have you heard this? And he
I
draws
don't
a
know. Keep
circle
going.
around himself and he says, listen, I don't know if those things are orthodoxy. I just know where orthodoxy is. It's in this circle.
That's great, man. Yep. Sometimes, I mean, okay, so I'm a healthcare chaplain. That's my how I earn my living, and so the pastoral and the social sort of sciences, like all of that's just really important to me. It's formed me, and I just have a certain frame of viewing social dynamics because of that training, I think. And sometimes, this will be a soapbox too, but just the nature of these conversations amongst laity and even clergy, like coffee hours and things. I just think like, what is underneath it? Like, what's going on? And sometimes just that sort of instinct towards like homogeneity and wanting to unite around something, and that's sometimes it's easy to be united around things that we're opposed to, but ultimately it doesn't sustain like good authentic relationships, and I just think that sometimes some of these conversations, like the people who are having them don't even, you don't have the fundamental building blocks to even have the conversations, and there are certain levels where I'm right there too, I shouldn't, so um I don't know, I just think that when we give these like anecdotes and we tell stories and things, like my mind more and more, and I've been guilty of this many times. Perhaps someone would claim I'm being guilty of this, as we're talking about this subject matter. I don't know, but it's like just more and more I notice that pastorally. Are you tracking? Do you notice that?
Oh,
Like you
absolutely.
that we sometimes, like, you have conversations and the conversations in your mind are like knowing what the common narratives are, and so you're like sort of responding to those, as you're reflecting, and I don't know. Anyway, soapbox over.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot going on there psychologically.
Yeah.
Um, I I think that um, Saint Mark of Ephesus, made a really profound point um, when he noted to the Latins during the Council of Florence that no individual father is infallible. And he needed to point this out because they were thinking that you could just kind of hand select which which fathers are infallible and go with them, right? And that would count as a tradition. And there's this odd thing that's happening today in the Orthodox Church where people are doing just that, contrary to Mark of Ephesus. And if actually Photius brings this up as well. It's really weird to me because the Orthodox fathers of these big councils tend to be more balanced than the approach we often get today. But like you said, it's not within any one tradition because we find this among many traditionalists. They only want to listen to particular fathers of the Latin West and or particular popes. They just happen to hand select and like, and so it does seem to be. I would call it not fundamentalism, but a cultural fundamentalism of sorts.
Yeah, and I guess maybe the reason this seems appropriate to chat about is because there is a lot of misunderstanding on both sides around authority magisterium, right? And
Oh
ultimately,
yeah.
we're seeking to not, like, I mean, at least for me, I'm not seeking to convert Catholics to my way of thinking. I'm just saying, hey, let's understand one another, and then we can make an informed decision, and that's at a baseline, like, let's have that, like Steelman and our opponent, that good Thomistic approach. I think that's great.
What do you think? Kind of going back to the piece of what is orthodoxy. How would you answer someone who says, "How do I determine what is orthodox?" Like if you're talking to a Catholic, right, who's thinking through this grid of like, here's how I know what Catholic is, right? we have we have the councils of the church, right? We're paying attention to we were giving certain authority to different teachings by the papacy or by the magisterium, right? Here's what we think about the catechism. These are ways we look at source documents. These are kind of how we determine what is Roman Catholic. How would you answer someone who says, well, how do I know what is Orthodox? Where do I go?
Yeah. So this is going to sound dismissive. Um, I'm going to sound, yeah, maybe pastorally
Go for it.
insensitive or something.
What do you
But
got?
let me just try an analogy first. We'll see if this works. So again, in the
Okay.
chaplaincy world, when we're trained and people face that, which we all come to at some point, that great existential, just that horrible moment where you realize like suffering is happening and to yourself, to someone you love, or really at that point, there's not a distinction, it's suffering. And This question, why, seems to kind of naturally pop up for the suffering human, you know? And we even hear our Lord, ask the question why, and there's qualifications there, obviously, that we could discuss, but it's like there's an inherent part of human nature when you're faced with that kind of suffering. It's just something is going on there, and our training is that that why is not actually a question. It's more of a statement to be attended to. Um, so let's say, by way of analogy, the person that comes to me with that question, and especially qualifying it in the way you did, in that hypothetical, to me, it's less of a question and more of a statement of where they're at, their anxiety. Um, and so it's not that I just dismiss it, but I think that there's a certain sense in the spiritual life of maturity, where the the presupposition, that underlies that question has more to do with one's experience and less about like where's a discrete knowledge base that I can, like data points that I can absorb that will inform me. I mean, there are different ways that we can speak about the philosophical tradition and different ways of understanding truth, and even that word, like different words. And but I so yeah, it sounds dismissive, or maybe avoidant. I know, but I think that pastorally, like when I hear that question asked to me, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to signify something about where they're at in their life, you know. Now, what's I think more helpful in that conversation is if uh, and there usually is, but if they can become aware of it and then be more pointed, and I'll try to challenge that. I learned this, Father Gregory Jensen, the pastor at our parish, is really great at this with catechumens, uh, not to be, intentionally off-putting, but sort of Socratically to kind of, you know, help someone understand, like, do you actually know what you're asking? And and like, why, like any good professor would do. Um, so if there's like a specific thing, whether it's about ethics, bioethics, about spirituality, the scriptures, let's talk about that, and we can maybe have something productive, But that question, like, what is orthodoxy? Good grief, I mean, it's union with God, it's prayer, it's pure, prayer. I mean, I think that, do you see my problem with like the question? It's something to me that has to be deconstructed necessarily, in order to help the person grow. But I don't know, that could be something I'm failing at pastorally.
Well, no, I don't know. It is. I mean, look, I would agree with you that it is a very Western question. Um, right. The very way that we do catechesis, like we have a catechism and read the catechism, and this is very Western, right? But these are the questions that we're being asked, and we're in Western society. It doesn't matter if the person who comes to you is Orthodox or not. They're going to ask you Western questions, right? I mean, a lot of the guys that I'm getting at my parish right now, they're really interested in Orthodoxy, but they won't let me help them grow in Orthodoxy because they refuse to walk that path. Okay? In other words, I want to start like St. Paul did with here's the milk. Let's build on the foundation, and eventually you'll grow in the foundation into the important questions, right? But like instead, they're jumping on the online bandwagon of what about the filioque way? Can we start off my Christian journey talking about the filioque way and dealing with papal supremacy and universal jurisdiction and all of the pop questions, right?
Right.
And I'm like, can we start with the fisherman? Can we start with Jesus and go from there? But they will not let me.
Well,
And
so it
that's
sounds like we're in agreement though, Father. And I think that,
yeah,
so the learned priest, God save whoever would call himself that, but like, the hypothetical learned priest out there that gets a lot of self-esteem from answering questions, right? Will gladly become the rock star and answer the inquirer and the catechumen's questions. And I've been there. I've been there as a young priest. I'm going to answer, I'm going to give you more than what you bargained for, probably over answer. My wife all the time, God bless her, laughs. She's like, you just can never just answer the question. And it's like, well, wait, it's a complicated question. So but the truth is, I like to wax, and that's probably why we're having a podcast right now, and I'm talking. So, but if we're, discerning, we may be doing damage. It's like I know you have your children. I've got not as haven't caught up to you. I've just got a lowly 4 under 10. But if they want candy and they want me to just keep giving them candy, and I'm like, no, like I'm not going to give that to you. You're going to get sick. Or you hear this puppy that we have in the background maybe barking, and he would eat treats all day, but he needs just his solid puppy food. He'll get sick if not. And so, as hard as it is to those of us who are critical thinkers, who love to engage and encourage critical thinking, um, and who are ourselves naturally inquisitive and curious and lifelong learners, that disposition is particularly challenging for us. But I think I've learned the power in saying, you know what, I want to talk to you about that at some point. I don't think now's the right time. Have you? How's the daily prayer rule going for you? Like, have you been able to pray like once a day? Are you able to pray once a day even? What do you like? And it's like being the pastor and changing the locus of the conversation. Um, so it's not that you're absolutely right. We will face those in Western society. The question is, do we perpetuate it, or do we use the questions just like, this is what Christ does? He takes the context, the cultural context, the questions, the debates, all of that that's live at his time. He doesn't dismiss it or avoid it. He engages with it in a far more transcendent way that cuts to the heart, that causes the hearers to really examine their motives and wait a minute, and he doesn't play ball according to the same rules as the Pharisees. It's transformational. So yeah, we're going to be asked these questions. We should engage them 100%. But the way, like the how, is what I'm saying. Like we don't necessarily have to point by point answer the questions and go back and forth, because it could just be making that person sick. They think that's what they came here for, is information. But we know that it's a relationship with Christ. Like that's what ultimately is the goal, is that union.
so I really appreciate your response. It's a great response. But I want to ask you. I have to ask you. And maybe at the risk of you psychologically analyzing me, but I have to ask you though, like, is there a solid answer to the question, um, how do I determine what orthodoxy is? Because this guy tells me this thing and this guy tells me this thing. Like,
Yeah.
Father, what do I do to figure it out? Like, is there a way to at least immediately alleviate the stress, give like some like just give a band-aid for the moment to make me comfortable so that I can go forward and just
Yeah.
experience Christ?
Yeah. I usually do like some kind of book recommendation, you know, or something. It's like, what is theology? What is science? You know what I mean? Like, what is orthodoxy? I just think that like I'm
Well,
not
no,
so
I'm
quick
asking how. How do I
to give
determine it? How
in.
do I know which one is which? Not what, but how.
So say more about that. Say more. Maybe I'm missing the
You're
question, the
analyzing me.
hypothetical question.
No, so no, what I'm saying is like how, so remember that if say someone comes up to like you're in a Roman Catholic parish and you come to the priest and say, "Hey, Father, I want to know what the Catholic Church teaches." All that the priest will do is like he can hand him a catechism, right? Here's what the Catholic Church teaches,
Yeah,
right?
I would say that would be pastoral malpractice.
Yeah, well,
I
okay, I
would,
don't disagree with you, but like, the point is that like
isn't that the point? Like, isn't
well,
this the point?
for me right now, the point is like here's like what I'm trying to ask is there a body of authority that I can go to get
Yeah.
my answers?
Well, if you mean a discrete catechism that looks like the Roman Catholic Church's catechism, I would say, and that has the same sort of authority, I'd say no. Like we have catechisms, different catechisms. But I mean, St. Peter Mogila's is one that's, very debated. And, there's a lot of, I mean, yeah, that just hasn't been our way. If someone says what is orthodoxy, I would say go to an Orthodox parish and live the liturgical life with that Orthodox. And yes, there are things to learn about posture in worship, about dogmatic controversies, about the hierarchy and the structure and all of those things. But it's experiential. I mean, essentially, that's what I think it is. And so, I have book recommendations. I have, especially again, if it's issue specific. Um, but I would say the best Roman Catholic theologians and mystics of the Western Church would not point to written documents to describe what is Catholicism or what is Catholicity. I just think that I think you've already sort of reached a problem in your presupposition, and so I know it's frustrating to some, and I accept it, and I accept with open arms the critique that would come with my response. But that's as authentic as I can be. That's kind of how I would go about it.
Okay, let me switch it up. Let me switch it up. So what is binding on the faithful?
As I said earlier, there's a few different things, right? So we like ecumenical councils, of course, but it's like I said, it's not reduced. Ecumenical councils aren't the only thing binding. In addition, are those teachings which have been accepted by the patriarchal synods, in union. So I think that's there. So I got this little fact from uh, a video Ubi Petros does on Orthodox Magisterium, and a couple of things actually. So I want to, I think uh, those videos tend to be pretty solid. From as far
Should
as
we
I can
plug
tell.
them into this video underneath?
Yeah, I think that'd be good. And then people could kind of research that out. I think there are times where Ubi is like kind of giving pastoral advice around like you should be fasting or you should be doing this or that kind of caused some loss in viewership. And I know certainly I was like I know it's not just one person. There's like a bunch of folks behind that. Um, but I thought that was like, yeah, you're starting to cross the line there. But the one on Magisterium, I think, I don't know if it's up for free or not, but we could find it and link it. But it
Okay.
talks about a lot about what I'm saying. I've gotten some things from what I've said today from that. So I appreciate him or them bringing those facts together and a really great presentation. But uh, in 1998, the ecumenical patriarch called a pan-Orthodox council to address the schism in the Bulgarian church. And 13 days after calling the council, representatives from all the synods arrived, and they unanimously agreed on who the rightful patriarch of Bulgaria was, and solved it. And some would point to the popes, the anti-popes, and that the whole question of council versus pope, as sort of the foundational decision making, but but I think that's another example, right? So if the patriarchs get together, the patriarchal synods get together, and they define something, then it's binding, and then we have the ecumenical councils, we have the teachings, obviously like tradition and scripture, the way, hagiography, hymnography, iconography, come into play. But these need to be qualified, taught, and so there's different levels for sure. It just hasn't been, we haven't found it to be the case to need to define, as much as like the Roman Catholic Church, has. So, yeah.
Maybe let's talk about that a little bit, because
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting subject.
Yeah.
A lot of folks, they tend to go towards the Catholic Church because it defines so much, right? There's like a real attraction to the ability to get very clear answers to every question you have, right? And there's almost a presupposition that if you can give me a definition of things and someone else cannot give me the definition, you win, right? And so like that's their means of determining, who's right, Orthodox or Catholic, or in some cases, Byzantine Catholic or Roman Catholic, right? And it's like, well, who gives the most scholastic answer, right? But that really does beg the question, doesn't it? Because is it necessarily true that claiming to have clarity of definition is better than not claiming to have clarity of definition? Or another way of putting it is having more clear answers to a thing necessarily better than not having clear answers to a thing? And
Yeah.
maybe I'll just give an example. So we both know Cardinal Henry Newman, right? And because he was, he was someone that we were studying when we were Anglicans. Of course, he became Catholic at some point, but he was deeply
because
rooted.
of the big portrait of his and the seminary pub that is no longer there, unfortunately. But
Yeah, unfortunately, our favorite place.
Yeah.
But it's
Sorry, go ahead.
at Vatican I Council, he went with papal infallibility, but he didn't think that it was appropriate to make it dogmatic. Okay, so there's maybe a sense within Orthodoxy oftentimes that, well, look, for example, we just celebrated the Dormition of Mary, but there's no need for the entire magisterium, if we call it that, right, within the Orthodox tradition, to say, hey, we believe in the Dormition, and everybody has to believe in this, and it's very clearly defined. Even though the Orthodox Church clearly does see that as a binding theology of it. I mean, it's a major feast of the Orthodox Church. So what do you think's going on there, and what are your basic instincts and working through that?
Well, I'd say first of all, it is like you say, it is definitive because it's in the liturgical calendar. So like you could choose not to celebrate it, but that doesn't change the fact that it's defined right there. Or, it's on the calendar. The propers are what they are, and it speak all of that is revelatory and speaks to binding tradition for sure. So I think that the liturgy and the text and everything, all of that that's proclaimed publicly. I mean, that's when you go to like the canonical tradition of the scriptures, and the canon being that which is repeated publicly, and that authority being given the binding authority. I mean, that's that was one of the defining factors. So I think the same is true of the liturgy, of the prayer life of the church, which also, there are many places, this could be a future podcast, where our texts talk about Mary as the
The
co-redemptrix.
mediatrix.
Excuse me, the mediatrix. Yeah, exactly. Maybe co-redemptrix too in some places, but definitely mediatrix. And anyway, that sometimes that word's like triggering to Orthodox, like I don't know, but I'm like, oh, it's right there in our text, so we got
Oh,
to
it
recognize
came
it.
from the Eastern Church.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
all Eastern first. The Latins only later discovered this theology from the East.
There you go. There you go.
It's not
So
questionable.
yeah, but I think that you frame it perfectly, right? Is more definition objectively better than less definition? And I think you can't say that it is just on that basis because it's a temporal thing, right? So like there was a time, 5, 6 centuries, right, where what the Immaculate Conception wasn't defined, right? Was the Catholic Church like worse off or less true because of that? It's like, so I think that, I think that we can't look at it from that sense. It's situational, objectively. Like, why is this the church? Why does the church need to exercise its teaching authority at this particular juncture? And there should be a good reason. There should be something that's theologically motivated, or something with faith and morals that is becomes compelling enough to have an official definition. um so so yeah, that's how I would think about it. Yeah.
Do you think the Orthodox Church, this is kind of a broad question and really speculative, but a lot of what we're talking about is speculative.
Yeah.
Do you think that the Orthodox Church feels pressured at all to answer these questions because of its kind of forced relationship with the West right now, especially kind of online? In other words, does it want to answer these questions? Is it hesitant to answer these questions? You have a lot of hesitancy, which is not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I think it means that you're being more steeped in Eastern tradition, quite personally. But do you think that a lot of Orthodox priests, bishops, etc., theologians feel the need that they need to define these things and need to have exact clarity?
I mean, sometimes people get sucked into things and they say too much. Like I said, I believe Father Peter, who is far more academically qualified than me, I'll just say that. But I think, for the record, like, he was attempting to respond to a common Catholic apologetic sort of, jab around magisterium. And he went with what he loves to go with, which is like, let's emphasize the authority of the holy ones, the saints, and look, to their writings as, and I think, again, I agree that there's an authority there, but then the way he tries to qualify it, I think there's some problems because he's attempting to answer that. And it's also, I mean, let's be honest, like what if you're running a business and you have to have content, right? Like, you find what's provocative, you find what's going to get clicks, and try to do that with integrity. So I'm not saying it's inherently wrong to try to get clicks, but it's just like all of those things, right, are part of the context. So yeah, but I think, and maybe you're right, maybe it's hesitancy, but for me, I feel like it's peace. I feel like I used to be in a place where I had this anxiety that I was really plagued to, like, I needed to, and if anyone had any sort of objection that I couldn't quite wrestle with, it you know floored me, and I had to figure, I would get obsessive about it, and it was largely just pride, and me thinking, like, who am I to think that I should have the answer to all of these, especially based on I have a master's level of theology, I have a few courses in Greek and Hebrew, like, who am I, like, I that it really is, yeah, I think it was indicative of my insecurity more than of some sort of like authentic hunger. And I think that's a hard thing. That's a really hard thing to discern, like we get so excited, especially in the church, like I mean, the church is struggling. Like, you look at attendance, you look at certainly the Orthodox church, I think the OCA and maybe another organization put out some stats around pre-shortages and things. And we need to engage with people. We in the Orthodox Church, most of our parishes we have so many missions, and most of our priests can't be sustained full time, and so we see people come in with what appears to be zeal, and it's really kind of the passions. I would say it's not authentic zeal, and then we just, because of our own being disposed to, we want, of course, we want to bring people to orthodoxy, but also we need people in our church. We want to feel like we're meaningfully engaged, and it's there's so much of that complexity within us that we have to uh, be aware of. You know.
Yeah, I think our conversation has kind of moved into the which is normal for priests to do this, right? It's
Yeah.
moved into the pastoral realm.
Well, that's normal for me too. You know this. I mean, this maybe is a frustrating thing, but that's my
No,
wheelhouse more, more
no,
than
I don't think it's not frustrating. It's dealing with the reality that we actually experience from day to day,
right.
right? Which is not what you typically are going to get in a podcast. You're typically going to get, here are the answers. And the reality is the way you're answering it is the way that I think okay, my reality, my experience of this is that's how I would answer it too, Father. Because there are times when I think more answers are better, and there are times when I think I wish we didn't try to answer so much.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is just the kind of that flow of life, right? There there are occasions where I just need a quick answer, right? And having in like that's advantageous being Catholic because we have all of the quick answers, like very quickly documented in dictionaries and whatever you like. We have it, right? We have the answers there. But then pastorally speaking, I think a lot of these things, as you noted, can bring a lot of unnecessary stress into people's lives, whether it be because of pop apologetics. That I think like YouTube is, in other words, like they have found an algorithm to keep people in a state of constant stress.
Yes.
They've like figured it out how to do it.
Absolutely.
And of course that affects our zealous young converts. But at the same time, I do think that, yeah, if it were up to me, and this is pretty, again, we're getting in the speculative realm, but I wouldn't make certain, I would not make certain things that have been recently stated as dogmatic things dogmatic, among in the Catholic Church. And the reason for that is because I see the unnecessary stress that's causing people. And I think your intuition of like, well, what is this actually doing for people's salvation is a good intuition.
I have a
But
question.
that's personal. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I have a question for you, maybe that will get us back into the more, the get us out, maybe out of the pastoral side. I don't know, maybe not. But how do
And
you
I don't know that we
understand?
need to, by the way, but sure.
Fair, fair. Yeah. Well, glory to God. So how does the sensus fidelium and the reception of the faithful to the magister, like how does that authority work? How do you understand that? And how does that sort of go along with the magisterium? Or like I think about like the Council of Ephesus, I think about times when again it wouldn't be there wouldn't be a case, I guess, where all the patriarchal synods had defined something and then the whole of the faithful and the majority rejected it, and then that proved to be like, overruling or something. But I think on a local level, you see the sense of the faithful and maybe rejecting something, a patriarch or emperor, you know, and then that kind of won the day. But I don't know. I'm just kind of, maybe I'm throwing you a curve here. But do you have thoughts on how, yeah, that sense of the faithful and the receptivity um, kind of plays into authority from the Catholic side of things?
Oh, you're gonna make me be Catholic. Okay.
Well, or whatever occurs to you. I just
No,
didn't know if because
I'm
I
teasing.
haven't studied this.
I'm teasing. Um, well, I mean, you know me enough, Father, that kind of my theology is a bit of a hodgepodge, of kind of Orthodox, like Eastern Orthodox and Latin. It's really I try to be historical is what I try is where I try to be, it's where I try to give my answers. So it seems to me that if you were to look at the Orthodox tradition, and trust me, I am getting to the Catholic point. But if you were to look at the Orthodox tradition, what you have is a mix of conciliarism and receptionism. And it's not just one, right? Because you have a lot of councils that claim to be ecumenical and binding, and in fact they are not later on binding and ecumenical. And the reason is because of the sensus fidelium, right? The reason that Florence fails is because of the sensus fidelium. Really, you have Mark of Ephesus, and that's it. He's pretty much standing alone. The faithful come back and say, "Yeah, we're not really on par with this council that the rest of you bishops signed on to." So it seems to me that you have conciliarism, but you also have the importance of receptionism, and um, and I think that's not mutual. These aren't mutual exclusive ways. They're actually complementary of the body of Christ.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So you have, if you think of, as you mentioned earlier, the like ecumenical, where you're talking about the ecos, the household of God. You have the structure of the bishops, um, coming together and speaking authoritatively for the body, but the body needs to know that what's being given by the bishops is genuinely organic to the body and it is not poisonous. And if the rest of the body is experiencing what the bishops are giving as poisonous, which has happened in plenty of councils throughout church history. You can think of the robber synod, right?
Yeah.
Um, then the body should and will reject it as a foreign agent.
Yeah, so
Um,
maybe I'm just thinking out, processing out loud, forgive me, but like maybe it's something like, right, you have a local synod or bishop, patriarch, you know, who defines something and the faithful reject it, and that local rejection or more broad rejection informs and influences the other synods and the other bishops, and so that's why it's not universally received. But I was trying to sit here and think of if there's a case, and I don't think there is, because that would totally, everything I've said could be falsified or like proven wrong if you could find a case where all the patriarchal synods agreed on something and the faithful rejected it, and then it was like reversed or something. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. But so anyway, I'm just thinking about, yeah, I think it
yeah,
is organic in the work of the Spirit and the body
it
of
has to be.
Christ, how you have the teaching authority, the reception, and then like exponentially that uh confirms itself, or the tension therein leads to a rejection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, or and it's a bit Hegelian. I realize that because we're talking about something like, you know, um, you know, this kind of
Moving
growing
more,
tension,
yeah.
which leads into a synthesis that eventually opens up to broader questions. But really, yeah, I think just by definition, if a synod, it means on a road together, right? Synodos, on a road or a way together. If I mean, it's literally called the synod because we're only on our way, which implies that we haven't reached our destination, right? This is, a blessed memory, Metropolitan Callistos Ware. He's the one who pointed this out in his book, The Orthodox Way. It implies that we're not there yet. And so it seems to me that you're not going to have like the RBI. You're not going to have the knockout punch with any ecumenical council or any one church father or anything of that sort, because the reality is that we're growing together as the body of Christ, and the process hasn't been completed yet.
Right. Yeah, there's a dynamism there for sure. Yeah.
But I think, yeah, maybe from like the Catholic vantage point, I think that the Orthodox, my personal perspective is that the Orthodox experience of conciliarism and receptionism is not incompatible with um with the papacy. It's
I
in my perspective, it's just that, in kind of echoing what I already just said, the church hasn't arrived at its understanding of how ecclesiology works. Even Metropolitan Hilarion Alfeyev says this in his systematic theology, that the Orthodox Church hasn't arrived at its ecclesiology. And I would argue the same thing for the Latin Church.
I agree with you. I don't think that it is incompatible. I think that, right, the church is infallible, not the Pope. I think we talk about papal infallibility because just like we would speak about the authorial infallibility of the you know writers of the scriptures, or I mean, like, and call, stop me if you think that this is, if I'm off here because you're in communion with the Pope, but like, right, the Pope is inspired, and according to the Vatican I definition, and can speak infallibly on behalf of the church, but it's not like his charism that he personally possesses. It's a charism of the Holy Spirit. It's bestowed upon him in union, right? And so the magisterium is, he participates in it. He doesn't define it himself, am I good so far? Or would you agree with all of that?
I think that's the best possible reading.
Yeah, yeah. And so
Yeah.
then, if we could dispense with, we can't probably at this point, but at least help qualify for Orthodox, and Catholics. Like, it's the Pope's not infallible, the Church is infallible, and so no bishop possesses, that charism at will. It is something that they participate in, whether in council, whether inspired, as St. Peter was when he proclaimed, Jesus to be the Christ, the Son of God. I mean, there's different ways in which that inspiration occurs and that infallibility makes itself manifest. But yeah, I think that it's not incompatible, and in fact, it seems to me that Vatican I, it necessitates that the the church, like the Pope can't speak apart from that church. But then, the hang up is like, all right, where's the infallible list of infallible,
Yeah. And good
declarations?
luck,
And
because everyone has a different list, right?
right, yeah. So,
Yeah,
but
I
I,
think
I
I think
would,
maybe the synthesis that I'm hoping to eventually see is like, well, Vatican One, all right, so it talked about this, it was trying to define this thing on the Pope's particular position within the church, uh, his particular form of primacy. And so they're trying to figure that out and trying to kind of nail that down. And then Vatican II says, okay, we went a little too far. We need to make sure that we're including the more important bit really is that the church is indefective, and And we need to make sure that we're understanding the bishops play a major role in this, and the rest of the faithful play a major role in this. And kind of, I think that the next step, or a synthesis, a necessary synthesis, will be drawing together how the Pope rightfully speaks infallibly on behalf of the universal church. And I think that for me is kind of an eschatological hope. Like, it's a hope that as the body of Christ grows together again, the great victory that we'll have is that we'll have the Pope's primacy as declaring that victory. And so that's kind of what I'm more hopeful for as well, as me, as a Byzantine Catholic priest who really does try to listen wholeheartedly to both sides of the tradition, both my Orthodox mother and my Roman Catholic father, I suppose.
Well, that sounds like probably a great place to end. And I know this is your podcast here, but I just have can I ask you one more question?
Sure, shoot it. What is it?
How have you experienced the the Chieti document? Like, is that something that's emphasized at all? Like, even Moscow signs off on this, this understanding of primacy, and like, it's really that synthesis you're speaking of. I feel like that it's expressed in that document, right? Like, is that something that is taught or emphasized in formation with Eastern Catholics, or is that something that you've engaged with a lot? Or is it one of those, well, it doesn't really reach a certain level of magisterial authority, maybe it's more ordinary magisterium or something, and so it's not a point of emphasis?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I read that document briefly. I think you might have been the one who sent it to me a while back.
Okay.
But I don't think it's made any kind of major inroads so far.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe it'd be fun to at some point in the future, just pull that bad boy out and just kind of look at it point by point, because I think that
delve into it.
That brings some good sort of, top agreement, I think, for the scholars and the ecumenical folks who were assigned that task. We could learn something there. So
cool. Well, thank you, brother. I always appreciate you.
Yeah, likewise. This is great. Hopefully it's helpful to some people, or minimally entertaining or something. I don't know. But yeah, no, blessings to you and the family. And thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, till next time. I hope to have you on again.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.